All right. Yeah, this is just an update, and I'll be brief. PETA, Todd, thanks so much also for the enormous example that you've set before Caroline and I. Heavy shoes to fill, but excited to take it on. Thank you so much. In terms of Ascend, many of you know already a lot about Ascend because I've hassled or talked to you innumerable times, and also you've spent a lot of time helping us collect quite a bit of data, and so we still have a long ways to go, but I'm really proud of where we are. So we have 105 sites that have committed to helping us. 90 of those sites are open to enrollment and moving forward, and while it's small, I'm really excited also because it represents a ton of contractual work that we actually have 7 sites outside of the United States that are enrolling, that have been enrolled, or sorry, 7 patients outside of the United States that have been enrolled as well and engaged in follow-up. And then we have 50 sites that have helped us to enroll one or more of our over 105 patients now. This slide's a little bit out of date, but I didn't update it with the most recent, so it says 102 there. But this is the work of those monthly screening logs that you send in, and what you'll notice here really is, I turn towards it, is that most of the patients that are eligible are being approached, and thank you so much for that. Each one of these patients is precious because we don't see that many of these, which is why we have 100 sites. But you're finding them and approaching them, and so I just want to say thank you a huge amount for that. There are some patients that are being missed, but not a lot, and then a few patients that have declined consent, but less because they're around 100 patients, about 8% of patients, and so. In terms of our enrollment, we're steadily moving as we onboard more and more sites, though recently, and a little bit surprisingly to me, over the last 4 months, we've been a little bit low. I just think it's what there's been in terms of eligibility, but I'm suspicious that as children go back to school, and we're all seeing these significant viral syndromes this year, that we'll see that tick up. This is just a list of all of the sites that have enrolled. Huge shout out to MUSC, who is our top enroller. But you can see, right, that everybody's a fairly low volume entry into Ascend. And again, that's why we're so broad, is because we recognize this is a low volume thing overall. And so we need to be at a lot of sites to do it. And just again, thank you for the huge amount of work that you've done to make it possible for us to enroll these patients. In terms of the follow-up work, our work after they've left, we're pleased with this. There is a little bit of a taper off in terms of that month 12 at 86% follow-up, but that just represents 14 patients. And so we're still hopeful that as the patients that represent 1 month, 94%, get into that 12-month range, that this is more of a patient process rather than a time lag eroding our follow-up criteria. But we'll see. We'll keep a close eye on that. In terms of our protocol update, so we've just submitted an IRB that's pending centrally, and then we'll send out to you once approved amendment that just mirrors what Prospect has done. And so Prospect has enlarged the age range from 14 days to 18 years old to 14 days to 20 years old, and so we're mirroring that change. Prospect has removed 2 exclusions. One is just that it used to be that acute abdominal process was an exclusion. Now it's just if it's an open abdomen, so we're mirroring that. And then it used to be that invasive mechanical ventilation at home was a contraindication, but now it's only if the OSI is greater than 6, so we're mirroring that as well. Ascend specific is that we're going to lengthen the pre-ECMO intubation days from 7 to 10. We'll let you know as soon as those protocol updates are there. And then in terms of outcomes, I'm just going to quickly show you outcomes, but I won't dwell on them because they're on clinicaltrials.gov. But generally, they're the things that we told you about at the beginning: change in functional status, change in health-related quality of life, and proportion of children with a new morbidity in what will be one of 2 primary manuscripts, which is just following our Ascend-specific group. And then the second is the comparative group, which is the comparison of the 90-day mortality, the comparison of the 1-year functional status, and the comparison of the 1-year quality of life. And so next steps is, like I said, we submitted our IRB on October 31st, and so we hope that that'll be locally approved, and then we'll move it out to each of you. And then we'll plan to reach out to you with some one-on-one meetings. We've just to make sure that you don't have any questions around the protocol updates and the process of getting that through so that we can support in any way. And then the last thing I'll just say is we've spent in our contracting time to allow us to receive your data from the ELSO registry for those patients that aren't enrolled, that are 14 days to 17 years old. And what we notice is that lines up almost perfectly with the screening logs that you've been sending in. So it doesn't look like we're missing patients other than the ones that we know about on the screening log. So again, just huge thank you for your diligence in making this possible. And so we're capturing the patients that are there to capture. The NIH has given us already a no-cost extension in writing, and so we'll have a little bit more time to get the work done. But thank you. If anybody has questions, Peter, are you saving questions for the end or no questions? If anybody has any, I'm happy to answer one or two if we have time. Otherwise, thank you all for all your.
Thanks to Todd, Peter, and Caroline for inviting me to give an update on a clinical trial that's up and coming. This is called TITRE, and it's an indication-based trial of red cells in ECMO. We're comparing indication-based trial with conventional threshold-based transfusion protocols. So the overview, I'm going to do a little bit of overview for this trial, just for people who are not familiar with that. So this is a randomized trial that is going to compare the effect of a threshold-based hemoglobin hematocrit threshold-based transfusion strategy compared to an indication-based strategy during ECMO. And the endpoints we're measuring are organ function during ECMO and neurodevelopment at 1 year. The threshold base is what you generally do currently in your practice, which is you transfuse for a certain threshold for your ECMO patients. And for the indication-based arms, transfusion is restricted to a few indications, which include bleeding, moderate or severe bleeding. We have definitions for those in our trial protocol. The second issue is if you have reduced tissue oxygen delivery, which is defined as a lactate of greater than 5 or a lactate of greater than 3 on 2 consecutive measurements, or a lower hematocrit threshold of 25. We're enrolling VA ECMO patients, all of them aged 0 to 6 years. And the premise of this trial is really to reduce unnecessary red cell exposure, which we think may lead to better survival and better neurodevelopment through improved organ function during ECMO. And if you think of ECMO patients going on ECMO with a number of organs that have failed, and that ECMO could be used to recover those organs, we think that transfusion or unnecessary transfusion may impede that process and may lead to poor organ function over the course of ECMO. We're hoping to we are randomizing 228 patients in 18 ECMO centers, and this trial is funded by the U.S. Department of Defense. This is kind of the real trial overview. Patients are cannulated for ECMO. They get consent at about 6 to 18 hours post-cannulation, and then randomization occurs, and we randomize to the indication or the threshold-based arm, and depending on which arm you are, you'll follow the protocol based on the arm. The endpoint is really ECMO decannulation or 30 days post-randomization. If you're still on ECMO 30 days post-randomization, you end there. We have a number of long-term follow-ups as well, and those include virtual follow-ups, which is at 3, 6, and 9 months. And the 9-month follow-up is health-related quality of life assessment, and then at 12 months, an inpatient neurodevelopmental assessment. Like I said, our endpoint is really P-SOFA score, which is an organ dysfunction score, and we're going to compare P-SOFA score across the course of ECMO. If you have a number of organs that have failed and your P-SOFA score is high, we hope that in the indication-based arm, by reducing your transfusion exposure, your P-SOFA scores will be lower, and therefore there will be better organ recovery. So the endpoint really here is a change in P-SOFA score. We'll also have plans for a biobank, and the biobank is largely to study biomarkers in the future that may indicate organ dysfunction. This is kind of our trial timeline. We were funded on the 1st of July, 2022, and there's a startup period. We have an 18-month period for enrollment of patients. There's a 12-month follow-up followed by closeout and analyses. We are going through a number of regulatory work that all trials require to move them forward. Our target enrollment time date is in January of 2023, although really the enrollment time that's indicated that we decided or planned for is 4/1, but we want to start early because we know that we haven't done a randomized trial in ECMO and that we may have issues with enrollment, and we want to learn so that we can improve the process as we go along. When we started the trial, these are the 18 sites that came on board, and we hope that all 18 sites will enroll patients as we move forward with the trial. We had the pleasure of bringing a number of people who were attending this meeting to come help us with really polishing our trial protocol. And the first trial meeting was yesterday at our Children's Hospital. And we really learned a lot about local practices so that we can tailor this trial to make it work. And a few examples of those are the lower hematocrit threshold. It's very different in various centers based on their practice. So we're working with sites to assess feasibility, and the feasibility is going to be based on local practices so that we can reduce protocol violations and to really make this trial operational. One aspect that we changed with feedback is that we know that neonates, the current practice is to have a higher hematocrit threshold, and similarly in patients with single ventricle congenital heart disease may need a higher threshold. So we've actually changed our lower threshold from 25 to 30 for those small groups of patients. We're also working with sites about how to get patients on board, patient identification, informed consent. And this is a time when families are under a lot of stress. How can we optimize that process? And also about how to randomize patients for the trial. Based on our analyses or thinking through some of the high-risk groups, we changed our randomization strategy. We have two randomization strata for the trial. One is age, which is neonates versus all other age group. And a second randomization strata is single ventricle with other congenital heart disease, given that patients with single ventricle palliation who are less than a year old on ECMO have poor outcomes, and we want to balance that across the two arms of the trial. There are a number of things happen in the background on any clinical trial, and I really don't understand a whole bunch of these things, and thankfully we have people who do. Those include keeping your IRB up to date with amendments as you change your trial protocol, to get data use agreements between centers. This trial is going to be run with a single IRB. The rest of the centers are going to rely on our IRB, so getting that process on board. And then, of course, business agreements. Everything of what we do is about money, so we got to get that right. We're also in the background developing CRF systems. We are building an online data reporting platform. We're developing trial promotion materials and brochures to kind of get this trial going. And then we're working with how we would collect the biological specimens and store them. Every trial needs a really strong trial group, and this is our very strong trial group. I'm a novice. This is my first interventional clinical trial. I know about ECMO, but I don't know very much about interventional trials, and therefore we're going to be helped by Lynn Sleeper and Jane Newberger and Murray Steiner, all very experienced trialists, and Chris Armand, all really experienced trialists. There are lots of people who have expertise in ECMO, clinical trial design, and blood transfusion. So it's a real combination of a whole bunch of people coming together to try and really design and run this trial. There are very few interventional randomized controlled trials in ECMO, and we haven't had one in 30 years. So we'll be learning a lot through this process. We'll hopefully set the stage for future trials in ECMO, and therefore we really would like to collaborate with everybody to achieve this goal. And a really important issue with this is really to improve outcomes for critically ill patients who need ECMO support. And we're very happy to reach out if people are interested in learning a little bit more about this trial, and if they want to hear a little bit more, would like to participate, please reach out to us, and our emails are out there. With that, thank you very much.
Hi, everybody. My name is Elise Zivic. I'm one of the peds intensivists at MUSC and lucky enough to work on the PediECMO steering committee and help organize some of our education efforts. So we just wanted to give you guys an update about some of the things that we've been working on. We have a little group of people that have been very helpful. And these are just a few of them that have helped provide ideas and support to some of the projects that we've wanted to do and that we're getting going. We do have an email address specifically for PediECMO education now, so it's not all just coming to one person. If you guys are interested in getting involved, it is a Gmail address there. So one of the things that we started this year was a journal club, and in an effort to try to make it a little bit less boring than some of your standard journal clubs, we actually did sort of like a conversations with the author, and that seemed to go very well. We had our first one in June, and Dr. Osment and Dr. Scott actually joined us, and we did it virtually, and we talked about their article on anticoagulation and transfusion management, and we had a good showing, and so I appreciate everybody that joined us for that, and we hope to do these maybe quarterly for right now, so our next one is going to be this fall, and we've talked about doing lots of topics that people seem to be interested in. I think we are probably going to be doing the tracheostomies on ECMO and pediatric ECMO article that came out not too long ago for our one this fall, but the exact details of that are still being worked out. But some of the other sort of recent articles that have come out that you guys may have seen or read, and then also we've talked about maybe doing some pro-con debates, kind of like how they do here at ELSO, just to, because there's a lot of things that people want to talk about. So those are some hope to be having those again, hopefully quarterly. But if you miss them, that's okay, because we actually have a YouTube channel now that we're putting some of these items up onto. And so if you would like to watch them afterwards, then the one we did in June is already up there and ready to go. And so we will probably put some of this information out through maybe our Twitter, so you guys can have links that way. Because I know we don't have a website right now to be able to collect all of these links, but putting out some of this information for everybody. And then one of the other projects that we have been working on is a database of sort of important ECMO articles and related to mostly pediatric patients, but also some of the major adult articles that if you're practicing with the patients requiring ECMO, you should probably know about. And I'm not sure, can you guys click the link? Will it actually bring up the browser? Maybe not. Looks like they're trying. Again, we'll try to include this link in some, oh, there we go. So this is a platform called Zotero that can store all your sort of PDFs if you want them, but you can have public links to things. And if you click on, let's see, if you were to click on one of the articles, especially one that was closer to a more recent one, actually go under the anticoagulation link on the left. And then click on the one that says Osment. I know that one has a link. The ones that are more recent, if you double click on it, it should bring up the browser for actually where you can find the article and download it yourself. And so for most of the ones that are more recent, some of the old articles don't quite have all that, but that way it's a way that you can download it through your institution or wherever you're at. And we're trying to keep that updated and add new articles as they come about. And that way there's a resource for people that are getting started in ECMO or just want to kind of keep up with the research. Can we go back to the slides, please? And then we've been working on cataloging the different fellowships that are out there and different programs that are offering mostly that extra year that's after you've done either PICU, NICU, or sometimes surgical training. They'll do an extra year of specifically focused on ECMO. And we have a link that is a Google document that is where we're sort of keeping and updating that. That is something that if you, that the link we can publish, but then you have to get permission from us to be able to view it through the PediECMO Gmail account. So it'll send us like if you click on the link, if you're really interested, it'll send us an email asking us to allow permission. And so, again, as PediECMO grows, maybe we'll have a little bit more of a centralized place that we can put all of these things, but this is sort of where we have everything now. And again, it's for anybody that's interested in starting a fellowship, seeing how other people have done it at their institutions. Some places are a lot more organized than others, and some places it's sort of like made up by the fellow that's coming in that year, but everybody has a little bit of different way of doing it, and also helpful to reach out to places that have done it, so if you're interested in doing it, you don't have to reinvent the wheel, and so we have that information as well. And then sort of other potential projects that we are talking about doing in our group is we would like to start having some sort of simulation database, and so whether that's people's simulations that they're running at their institutions, kind of kept in a centralized location, or getting together and coming up with our own to kind of help provide education for people as well too. The SCCM Guardians program is how we're helping out with mentorship. Right now, you guys may have seen if you've been on the PediECMO listserv that we have published that for the last few years, sort of helped to promote it. It's a program done by the Society of Critical Care Medicine, and they match junior and senior members with common interests. So you can put in there that you're really interested in ECMO, and they will put you with somebody that does a lot of ECMO. And I think several people have taken part in it in the last few years and actually found it to be a pretty good program. They do a call once a year for members. They did just have a call in the last month or so that may actually be closed at this point, but if you're really interested, just give us an email, or just email that email account, and we can see if they would still be able to take you this year or if it had to be next year. And then many of you might remember when we presented in the springtime, we talked about a new potential project called ECMO Pediatrico del Mundo. That is a project where people are working on how we can get education around the world, and to people that are really specifically interested in pediatric patients. Probably more to come on that in the future. Not a lot of updates on that right now, but that is something that's also in the works. And I think that is everything. So any questions I can take, or y'all can just email the account. Thank you.
It's a real pleasure to be here. I want to start off by saying thank you to PETA and Caroline for the very gracious invitation and for allowing me to discuss this work. So tomorrow I'm going to be talking about our pathway of translating this from the animal lab to a clinical trial, and I'll just give brief allusions to that today. I don't have any important disclosures, but here's our grant funding that's funded this pathway, started with the American Heart Association and is now funded by the NIH for our most recent clinical trial. So this is review for everybody in this room, but just to sort of level set us. Outcomes from ECPR still leave a lot to be desired. And as we all get better at ECPR, I think we're all going to be turning our attention towards from implementation to how can we best bridge to the best possible outcomes. And even in the modern era, across the literature, it's pretty consistently shown that mortality is still around 50%, and a major contributor to adverse outcomes is still neurologic injury and renal injury and other ischemic injuries that, at least in part, occur from the ECPR process. So that's what we're here to try to address. Part of ischemia and reperfusion, so that process, the biology of ischemia reperfusion injury is immensely complex, and we could fill 10 hours and only partially cover it. But one major component of it is diagrammed here in a very simplified way, which is as electron flux is not met any longer by oxygen flux in the inner mitochondrial membrane, the electrochemical potential across that membrane becomes distorted. And as oxygen is reintroduced, electrons are then used to create toxic free radicals. And those free radicals directly damage DNA and lipid membranes, which is thought to be basically the final common pathway that leads to apoptosis and cell death. And that, of course, leads to the global manifestations of brain injury and renal injury, et cetera. And one major intermediary player in that process is called the hydroxyl radical, which is essentially water without one of the protons. It's been shown that hydrogen gas, which is 2 protons, goes in and selectively chemically reduces hydroxyl into water. So that's all the basic biology will do, okay? I promise. So we first started off by examining hydrogen's application in a swine model, and I'll talk more about that tomorrow, but essentially what we showed was that when you give hydrogen gas through the ECMO membrane, or in this case a bypass membrane, and through the ventilator for a period of time after an ischemic injury, that the brain injury that results is significantly attenuated. So shown in red here are the control animals, and in blue are the hydrogen-treated animals. So we significantly reduced the brain injury that occurred by MRI. And there were, of course, clinical sequelae that confirmed this. We then pursued a first-in-human, in the US anyways, clinical trial demonstrating the safety of inhaling hydrogen gas. We did this during the COVID pandemic at Boston Children's Hospital, which was actually very fortuitous because we had a whole bunch of college students who were doing all their college classes over Zoom, and they were very happy to be paid to breathe hydrogen in the hospital and get free food for a couple of days. So that was great. The clinical trial was successful. We showed no real changes in vital signs and any lab markers, EKG. There were no symptomatology that occurred as a result of inhaling hydrogen. So this was 8 patients. They had a graded exposure, and the last 4 patients breathed hydrogen for 72 hours, which is kind of empirically how long we're thinking about administering hydrogen. So that brings us to our eCPR trial. We're calling this the Hydrogen FAST trial, hydrogen's feasibility and safety as a therapeutic agent in eCPR. And as PETA mentioned this morning, this has recently been funded by the NHLBI. And similar to Ravi's group, we're partnering with Lynn Sleeper, who will run our data coordinating center, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. So I just want to spend a few minutes talking about our trial design. So this trial will be an emergency trial, so it's essentially a very time-sensitive therapy, and traditional informed consent is really not possible. And so, as you may or may not be familiar with, there is a approved process by which informed consent, traditional informed consent, can be delayed, and the therapy begun ahead of time, called EFIC, or exemption from traditional informed consent. That requires a lot of planning, so this trial has a 1-year planning roll-in phase, and during which we'll be doing a lot of the regulatory requirements related to the EFIC component. That includes community consultations with experts and with community members who are familiar with cardiac arrest and brain injury. Once we have the approval process in place, we'll begin enrollment. There will be a phase 0 phase, so a vanguard phase, if you will, of 3 patients at Boston Children's, following which we'll enroll 53 patients in a 3-to-2 ratio between Boston and Texas Children's over a 3-year period. Randomization will take place at the time, and enrollment will take place at the time of eCPR. So we're envisioning, as cannulation is happening, that on the ECMO cart that there will be actually an envelope that will have their group allocation assignment, and that will be done by the treating clinicians at the bedside. And it'll be in an unblinded way. So everyone on the team will know that this will be a hydrogen-assigned patient or a control patient. And we'll talk about, maybe I should do that now. So the way that we're actually talking about treating patients is very similar to what we did in our animal study. So there will be pre-mixed tanks that contain the set concentration of hydrogen, which is 2.4%. And we're making a mixture that contains oxygen and a mixture that contains air. And essentially, those two mixtures will be fed into the ventilator inlets. So we did this for our animal trial, and it actually worked extremely well. If you're wondering about the flammability or explosivity of hydrogen, which most people think about when I first mention that we're doing a clinical trial with hydrogen, that's above 4%. So the risk is really all taken away in the manufacturing process. And so everything that we bring on site onto the clinical realm is in a non-explosive, non-flammable mixture. Of course, the oxygen mixtures are flammable, but so is oxygen. So at any rate, we're doing a lot of work for the FDA to show that these mixtures don't interfere with the function of the ventilator and of the ECMO membrane. The sweep gases on the ECMO membrane will also contain hydrogen mixtures. Okay, maybe I'll talk about endpoints now because I'm running short on time. So our primary endpoints, Peter's giving me the look like, you better wrap this up. The primary endpoints are feasibility and safety. So it'll be the fraction of time that patients are able to be treated with hydrogen. We don't take for granted that that will be possible for any number of logistical reasons. And then the safety endpoint was actually kind of difficult to design because bad things happen to all sorts of patients on ECMO, regardless of whether they are on hydrogen or not. And so we are going to compare possibly hydrogen attributable SAEs of interest between the two groups, and that will be essentially chosen from a list. So we've predefined a list of AEs that we're interested in, and we're going to those will be adjudicated by an independent external committee as to whether they may or may not be hydrogen attributable. And we'll compare the frequency of those between groups. And secondary endpoints, of course, we're going to be looking at efficacy, including survival, functional status score. At baseline, we'll change into an FSS, as Ravi is, as well as at six months out. Lab-based markers of ischemic injury. And then we're going to explore brain biomarkers similar to, and probably in collaboration with Melly's group. And we will also be examining brain MRI. And you might be wondering about brain MRI in ECMO patients. So, and just to add one additional layer of complexity, we're going to be entertaining the idea of a portable brain MRI. So if you're not familiar with this device, you probably will become so shortly. This is made by a company in Connecticut called Hyperfine, and it's a 64 millitesla magnet that is essentially is ECMO compatible. We've done some benchtop testing demonstrating that it does not interfere with centrifugal pumps or temporary pacemakers. And so we're going to be also doing this as an exploratory step to see whether this can be a proximate endpoint in a future larger clinical trial. So hydrogen appears to be safe and effective in animals, and our early data with humans is also favorable. And so we're going to be undertaking this trial really to lay the groundwork for a multi-center trial, hopefully within a few years. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Same disclosures as earlier today. When Todd and I started as co-chairs of PediECMO, somebody told me it was really important to do something big when you take on this sort of role. And Jen Mazinski challenged us to do this. And so peace has become the labor of PediECMO in my mind, even though hopefully most people are blissfully ignorant of at least the pain. But Jen Mazinski is the best collaborator anyone could ever imagine, and we've got the best group and a really important network that's developed out of the Pediatric ECMO Anticoagulation Collaborative. We started out with these lofty goals, but as you know, there's not a lot of evidence in the way that we'd consider normal evidence for medical decision-making. And so we've started with some consensus statements via a Delphi method that we're really pleased with. We're really excited to be moving forward with the research priorities, and I think that out of the whole process, that's going to make the biggest difference for the field.
And so huge kudos and thanks to the co-chairs who've led the groups and moved things forward. I did want to give you an update of why we're still not quite submitted. And so one of the things that we've added late in the day is a couple of implementation science features that we'd always intended to include, but they've just taken some time to action. So this is from Group 7. For those of you who don't remember, Group 7 is the peri-procedural management of ECMO anticoagulation. And Ariane Willems, and Ariane, if you're here and I haven't already seen you and given you a hug, please let me know. No, I don't think she is either. I just wanted to make sure. So Ariane Willems did the most phenomenal job of working and reworking these tables. And she came up with 2 different ways of presenting the data that we're going to include in both formats. So version A is based on the quality of data supporting the recommendations. And that's the one that I've got on the screen now. You may remember that we ended up making recommendations for the peri-procedural group according to a minor or low risk of bleeding estimation, and that's based around literature for patients with coagulopathies, endogenous coagulopathies, and then a subsection of major or high-risk bleeding procedures that is non-cardiac, and a subset that is cardiac, obviously with cardiopulmonary bypass being included in the second. And so Ariane Willems, full credit for these. And the second version is based on the recommendation, with a green tint being, yes, please do this, and a red tint being, we'd recommend against this. And so she's done an enormous amount of work that will be included in the publications. I couldn't clip the Group 3, Carolyn, tables in the same way, but the other thing that will end up being included in the PEACE anticoagulation publications will be some tables to help people decipher why APTTs and anti-10As and ACTs don't necessarily match in directionality all the time. And we're really excited that might actually be helpful at the bedside. So this is the other last step that we're waiting on to move things through. And we, in addition to the tables with directionality of intent of action as well as level of evidence backing up the recommendations, we really wanted to include some diagrams that just gave people a kind of global perspective of where we're up to. And so Group 8, the group that's managing bleeding and thrombotic complications of ECMO, have come up with these diagrams, and we're actually pretty happy with them. So they include the recommendations for overall anticoagulation management for clinically relevant bleeding. We were pretty happy with the little dude in his green t-shirt and his endotracheal tube in. And any recommendation that we want you to action is labelled in a green, and any potential hold-up is labelled in a red. This is the bleeding diagram, and you can see these are my comments back to the illustrator, who's been fantastic, just to say we want those units changed and we want these bits and pieces just all completely consistent with the text. And this is the thrombotic complications. So the thrombotic complications, you can see still included a little spiel about bleeding, which we don't need, and we're replacing some bits and pieces just with text that completely matches the text within the manuscripts. And so we're so close. If Mella's here, yes, I see you now, hi, still coming, but just the final bits and pieces I now appreciate take forever. So our next steps are so close. We're going to finalise the manuscripts. We're going to send to all of you who've put in so much work over the last 2.5 years. Thank you for co-authorship consideration and final approval before we send to the SRCs of ELSO and Polizzi for approval to submit to the next level. The next thing for our group is to action the research priorities that we spent a lot of time identifying. We were intending to hold an event here in Boston at around this time of year, but with COVID coming back, the hospital has closed down everything, and even holding the TIDA trial yesterday, any of you who are there know that we had to eat outside, mask in, it was all a little bit complicated. And so we're planning on holding this event early next year. This is a QR code to link to a registration. If this is something that you missed on the first pass, that you really want to be involved with as it continues forward, please use this QR code, or call me, or email me, or trip somebody. You don't have to do a lot to get roped into this, but it's going to be important, I think, the most important outcome, I think, from the process that we've undertaken. A huge thank you to all of you who looked at abstracts and extracted data. It was such a big process, and we're really close. I love the idea that we might solve all the world's problems. Sometimes it feels like that'd be easier. I'm done and signed out and signing over to Carolyn and Ryan Bavaro, and I'm so excited for where PediECMO is going. Your collaboration and constructive criticism and willingness to come and share ideas and share in other people's ideas is just remarkable, and it's such a great group to be a part of. I've completely bought into Mella's enthusiasm from the smallest little grain, but it's really built, and I can't wait to see what you guys do next. If it happens to be something with the cardio help system, and you'd like to click on this QR code to see whether you might be interested in looking at some sort of prospective observational study of the cardio help system, we'd love for you to fill out this survey. Completely no obligation. Include or don't include your contact details. But whatever you can give us and whatever you're willing to share, I'll be back in touch.